Hello once again, I'm Don Jackson with the heartbeat of the internet. One of TV's great sitcoms was about a little neighborhood bar in Boston with its cast of regulars. A friendly drinking establishment where everybody knows your name. The TV show was Cheers. There were so many great characters created for the show, including Norm, who always appeared in each episode on the same stool, seeming to nurse that same mug of beer. I'd like you to think about your own favorite watering hole. Look, the lights are going down. The band is ready to begin their first set. I hear they're pretty good, so let's sit back and listen. Yes, waiter, I'll have a round from my friends, if you will. A lot of the bars today hold very little interest for me. Too many of them are like big box stores. They are so much like franchises that even the decorations seem to have come off an assembly line. You go into any major city where one of these franchises are, and there is nothing that sets it apart from the one that you're used to back home. A bar or a small nightclub has to be unique. It has to have been in the same location over a couple of generations. Not too popular that there is always a lineup at the door. It has to be a place where you know there is always going to be a seat waiting for you. And it has to have an oral history that you're familiar with. It doesn't have to have a checkered past, but some color only adds to the reputation of the establishment. It should also be a place where you know the bartender. You're recognized when you walk through the door, and your favorite drink is being prepared as you sit down. He or she knows some of your story, enough to begin a conversation if you're by yourself. A good bartender will also know when to leave well enough alone, especially if your mood telegraphs that you want time by yourself. The drinks should be generous and never watered down. The beer should be cold, and they should have no problem with your martini either being shaken or stirred. You should also be aware of who's the designated driver in your group, and make sure that that driver has his favorite soft drinks or a coffee. He should also be prepared to take away the keys and call a cab when one of his customers is adamant about driving home. The music needs to suit your taste, but not too loud that you must shout to be heard. That is, until the band or the singer takes to the stage. Then all bets are off. If it's someone at the piano, he needs to take the occasional request and be able to sense the mood of his audience. And if he's really good, he may know more about you than you think. Most movies of the past few decades based on science fiction have featured a bar scene, and there is a very good reason for that, and it all has to do with the original Star Wars movie and the idea it introduced. The entertainment was exotic, to say the least, and the patrons were even more unusual, consisting of species from every backwater planet in the local star system. It was a place where you might find vile creatures hatching schemes in booths in dark corners, and off-world bounty hunters looking the place over, ready to pounce at the first sight of their prey. Since Star Wars, it's a setting that has been used time and again to great effect. It shouldn't surprise you to think that the future would be very similar to the present. The only change being that humans and aliens could gather together for a drink to drown their sorrows. One of the most famous bars would have had to be Quark's, a place of ill repute run by a shady little alien called a Ferengi on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. He was a loathsome creature who only worried about profit and treated his staff, including the women, with little or no respect at all. Thankfully, the local constable on the space station was a shapeshifter who never trusted the owner and knew that if there was any crime being hatched or taking place on the station, Quark would either have his fingers in the pot or know who did. Walk into any nightclub today that features dance music. Bodies seem to writhe in and out of the colored spotlights, moving to the incessant rhythms of the beat. It used to be that the DJ was off in some booth and out of sight. Now he's the star of the show and front and center on stage. Not all bars are upscale with a fairly well-to-do clientele. Do you remember the scene in the comedy Airplane? Robert Hayes and Julie Haggerty are the last ones to leave the dance floor of a seedy little bar, a place that, to me, resembled a speakeasy. I'll always remember the bar in the film It's a Wonderful Life, the one George goes to immediately after Clarence the Angel gives him the opportunity to see what his little town would have been like without his influence. After the Angel's interference, the bar served a much different clientele, one that didn't take kindly to strangers. One of the most famous bars in the world is in Paris, France. Writer A.E. Hotchner, author of such books as The Man Who Lived at the Ritz, among others, and in an article about that famous hotel that appeared in the August 1984 issue of GQ magazine, wrote about Ernest Hemingway and his time spent at the Ritz in Paris. He said that Hemingway had his regular suite on the garden side of the famed hotel. In fact, he tells us that the little bar was renamed the Hemingway Bar in honor of its most celebrated patron. The Ritz had its little bar, and Raffles in Singapore had its long bar. It was in the long bar in 1915 that one of the world's best-known drinks was invented, the Singapore Sling. The drink includes Benedictine and Cointreau with slices of fruit and topped off with a little paper umbrella. But I'm sure you could still get a Singapore Sling in the Hemingway Bar in Paris. F. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway were enjoying drinks together in the little bar that eventually was named after Papa Hemingway, when in walks a rather suave British gentleman with a woman whose sense of mystery and allure made Fitzgerald command the bartender to send a groom out for a box of orchids. When he returned, Fitzgerald had it sent to the woman's table, hoping she would accept the token of his affection, and the note with it that suggested they meet at a later time. She promptly refused the gift and had it returned to the sender. F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, lifted the lid on the unopened box and began to eat the orchids one petal at a time. Author A.E. Hotchner wrote that Hemingway later said that the orchid ploy worked, and Fitzgerald and the lady did finally meet. You know, there should be courses on when to keep silent and how to listen. And maybe they should be taught by jazz musicians. You could learn a thing or two from jazz trumpeter Bunny Berrigan. This anecdote was recounted by fellow jazz musician Al Rose, and it appeared in the June 6, 1996 issue of the Globe and Mail's Social Studies column. It seemed that Berrigan carried packs of chewing gum with him whenever he joined a friend in a bar for a drink. He would chew on a few pieces, and after ordering drinks, he would get up from his seat and head to the men's room. At least, that's what Rose thought. In reality, Berrigan would go to the jukebox, take his wad of gum out of his mouth, and place it in the coin slot. This way, he was ensured of a quiet environment for his conversation and drinks. The next time I go to a theater, I think I'll take some gum with me. I'll offer a few sticks to the first person who opens his mouth near my seat or who talks on his cell phone. Who knows, it just might work. Do you remember the Italian film Il Postino? There is a wonderful scene when the postman, Mario Rupolo, is looking out over the sea with his new friend, the great poet Pablo Neruda. Mario wants to learn how to become a poet so that he can win the heart of the local barmaid, Beatrice Russo. He learns a lot from the great poet and embarks on that crusade to win the barmaid's heart. In one of the Super Quiz columns by Isaac Asimov was a list of some of television's most popular watering holes, and even one very famous one in the movies. Humphrey Bogart's Tavern in Casablanca, Rick's Café Américain. During World War II in a city like Casablanca, spies for both sides would gather in a bar like Rick's to check out the opposition. The pub in British TV's long-running soap, Coronation Street, was called Rover's Return. Archie Bunker from TV's All in the Family bought this tavern and renamed it Archie's Place. Of course, it originally was called Kelsey's Bar. I wonder how many bars the world over bear that familiar name. At this tavern, you heard where the elite meet to eat. Archie the manager speaking. Of course, it was Duffy's Tavern. The tavern from which the pilgrims begin their journey in the Canterbury Tales, the Tabard Inn. And the tavern owned by Kitty in Gunsmoke and frequented by Hoss was called the Long Branch Saloon. But not all women who worked the bars were as successful as Kitty. The character in that song epitomizes what a good bartender should aspire to. Every town in the Old West, no matter how small, had a saloon where the locals gathered to wash away the dirt, the grittiness of life on the trail. At the head of the gulch, on one of the largest pine trees, they found the deuce of clubs, pinned to the bark with a bowie knife. It bore the following, written in pencil in a firm hand. Beneath this tree lies the body of John Oakhurst, who struck a streak of bad luck on the 23rd of November, 1850, and handed in his checks on the 7th of December, 1850. An excerpt from The Outcasts of Poker Flat, written in 1858 by Bret Harte. It was a dangerous place. An argument over cheating in a game of poker could end up getting a person killed. The date was August 2nd, 1876. The real Wild Bill Hickok was gunned down from behind and shot dead by Jack McCall while playing poker in Deadwood, South Dakota. The saloon keeper, Carl Mann, Charlie Rich, and Captain Massey were all about to lay down their cards when Jack McCall entered the rear door of the tavern and shot Bill in the back of the head. It was the only time Bill had sat with his back to the door. And for those who are interested in such things, Wild Bill Hickok's hand contained a pair of aces and a pair of eights. There has been a lot of bad luck associated with card games, especially as in the case of Wild Bill Hickok being in the wrong seat at the wrong poker table at the wrong time. You have to be careful that your luck doesn't run out when playing cards. So, where do you meet people? Well, that sounds so ridiculous. Just walk out your front door, and you can easily be enveloped in a sea of faces. But who would take a chance on meeting someone on the street? We are so suspicious, and in this day and age, you almost have to be. You can't be too careful about who you befriend with all the crazies walking around out there. A person can look relatively harmless, but looks can be deceiving, and bars are really no place to meet people. They might be a good venue to meet with friends you already know, but some establishments still have that stigma of pickup attached to them. And again, you have to be careful. Someone who looks promising over a drink in a darkened corner can turn out to be the modern-day equivalent of Mr. Goodbar, and that's not someone you want to be looking for. Finally, an excerpt from Annie Proulx's recent collection, Close Range, Wyoming Stories, published in 1999 by Scribner. Outside, the sky was green-black, and trucks driving down the street had their headlights on, dimmed by constant lightning flashes. The electricity went off for about 15 seconds, the bar black as a cave, the jukebox dying, and a huge, amorous, drunken, and delighted moan coming up from the crowd that changed to cussing when the light flickered back on. End quote. There are bars like that just about everywhere in the United States and in Canada, and possibly other places in the world as well. Let's head to an after-hours club for last call. Time for one last set by the band. And so I'll say goodnight, sweet dreams. I'm Don Jackson.